All right, so I'm gonna stream a little bit. Let me announce that this stuff is live. I think it's right here. All right, so I'm going to react to, well, not to this, but to this thread here. So this is something I see. Actually, let me start the recording. So this is something I'm going to record a little stream because I've seen this here, and I guess this Shreya. This is she's behind the doc ETL. Oh, cool. So like a thread about how horrible LLM driven programming is, especially once you start making bigger things. So this is an example. I haven't fully read through it. Actually, let me read it through. How come nobody is talking about how much shittier engine calls are thanks to blind integrations of AI generation code? So, I mean, obviously, if you integrate code blindly, and as a software engineer, you shouldn't integrate code blindly, right? Neither from a colleague, neither from a human, or from an AI generated code. So this kind of holds up removing the AI. LLMs are great coders, but horrible engineers. All right, yeah, they're LLMs. They're not even great coders. They're good at producing language. I'm not attacking Shreya here. I'm just like giving. I hope it doesn't come across as too sarcastic, because it's not meant to be. Actually, it's yeah, they're horrible engineers, and I would even go further and say they're horrible coders. Like the times where great code comes out of it, it's really surprising, but it's not like their inherent greatness. It's just like, oh, it happens to fit what they do well. And so, but however, this is pretty strongly worded already, right? Like the solution is not prompt the LLM to write more documentation and tests. So I've been writing code with LLMs for 2 years, 3 years if you count Copilot, now, and I've been really productive. Like I wouldn't hesitate 1 second to say that I'm like a 20x engineer, meaning that I've produced 20 times the amount of software I would have produced if I hadn't had LLMs. Like I've just written a ton of software that I wouldn't have written otherwise. Doesn't mean that I necessarily code faster, although I do, but I also try just writing more software. I just like have more fun writing software. I can make more things in the amount of time that I have, in the amount of cognitive function my brain has. So anyway, she takes React development as a purpose and says like how every time excuse me, she adds a new feature to the code base. Actually, let me see if I can open the chat window on my OBS. Just in case someone's in there. Not that I think anybody would. Actually, I may post this on Mastodon as well. All right. So let's move on. Right, so you add a new feature. Of course, it's going to add like one more of the things that are already there because it kind of matches, right? If you think of them as probabilistic language models, that just like, and so same. These are all techniques that I see pretty often, and it's like LM programming with LLMs is not simple, right? Like you can't just like sit down and say like, yeah, whatever, I'll type in this, it will do it right, because that's what everybody promises me or what I think the hype promises me. So if you add it to add a thing, right? Like words are really important with LLMs. If you ask it to add something, it will add something instead of I mean, Claude, Sonnet 3.5 or so, that is like kind of clever enough to realize that adding a feature is not the same as adding code. But a lot of LLMs are just going to be like, yeah, you asked me to add stuff, I'm going to add stuff. So that might be a first reason where you have to be really careful when prompting of the words you use. And this is something you just like kind of gain by practice. Even if you had like a list of rules or whatever, it would be like akin to learning, language with Duolingo. It's you need to practice it. So the next point is, and this is more, I guess there's like more of a general pattern here that I want to address, but so Shreya says, like the burden is on me at this point to test exhaustively the generated app where they made interactions. Like, you're basically putting your signature on this code. So yeah, you need to test that it works, right? And the bigger pattern here is, I think there's this wishful thinking of being able to delegate your responsibility as an engineer to the LLM, but like, no, you're the engineer and the LLM is the LLM, right? Like it's a bunch of numbers on a GPU. You still have to like, your responsibility is yours just as it is before. You can say like, oh, the compiler promised me that the code is going to be correct, and like I don't need to verify that it is correct, for example. But the bigger picture here is, I think you're not going to be replaced as an engineer. Your engineering labor might be replaced by the LLM, right? Like the time you as an engineer it takes you to do something correct without an LLM might be an order of magnitude bigger than doing the same thing with an LLM. And so often when I say that, software as a profession is kind of over, it's mostly like the labor has so been drastically reduced that like as a single person I could do the work of like 3 teams before, like legit, not just because I can generate code faster, but also because so many feedback loops are closed. But at no point do I turn off my engineering brain. And on the contrary, the things that are important in engineering are all mine, and then everything is like kind of what you want to call coding. Although I do think that both are much more intertwined than is acknowledged. Creating code that the machine can like then run to do whatever I as an engineer wanted to do. That stuff that LLMs can be good at right? Like they can also be good at generating tons of code that makes no sense and just like doesn't conduce that. So, and she identifies something here which is true, right? Like if you ask an LLM to do stuff on a lot of tokens, multi-file edits, like it's not going to do a good job because it has limited context windows. The ones with bigger context windows are going to not be able to deal with it as well as with smaller things. And then also just like it's hard to extract patterns out of a huge corpus of text than it is to extract patterns out of a small corpus of text. So, and then we have here, like you ship LLM generated code without doing full testing. Like, yeah, that's the same thing would have happened if you had shipped bad code by a human, right? It's like, no, you need to make sure that the code you ship works. That hasn't changed. What might have changed here is that you kind of got wooed by either the promise of LLMs for programming or by the fact that the code looks so much more consistent and decent than a human code would have been. Like sloppy human code looks like garbage, and sloppy LLM code looks like great. Right? Or it is called clunky, but then like why did you ship clunky code, right? Like that makes no sense. It's like if I want LLMs to help me while programming, they should generate like decent code. And so what this I'm rambling here. Jesus, I hope this I can make this up with like concrete examples. Yeah, they don't know how to when to refactor because like even for humans this is hard, right? Like how do you refactor? Why? When? It's often it is a social decision. It makes sense to refactor in the context of the team you're on, the history of the software, like whatever the company is going to do in the future. All of these things impact the refactor, and that's something that even if it was in the context window when you ask it for a refactor, the LLM might not really be able to include all the nuances that you can as a human, right? And yeah, exactly, right? Like they don't have the forward looking, like, cool, yeah, of course they don't. Like like they're an LLM. And So they do the thing that probably makes the most sense within the context of the code that you give them, which is like if everything is in a state and you ask it to add a new feature, then it's going to add like one more feature to the state. But if you know that you want to use context and just ask it to like, add a more feature and they use context, like that's not hard to prompt. And this brings me to what you as an engineer with LMs have to do is like if you don't turn off your engineering brain, like basically what you're doing is taking a problem and then breaking it down in such a way that a computer can do the job that you want it to do. And be it an LLM or a compiler or like a package manager or a browser, is like you break down your problem with kind of known capacities of different pieces of software and you define your problem such that these pieces of software can give you the final results. And LLM fit exactly the same thing. Like you as an engineer have to break down the problem such that an LLM does a good job. And if the LLM doesn't do a good job, then like either do it by hand or you need to break it down differently. And so this is similar, right? Like this is stated so authoritatively, but it's like if LLMs write useless documentation, then it's like because you've asked LLMs to write useless documentation. It sounds crass, but like the LLM won't do anything on its own, right? It's like, and so if you wanted to write good documentation, you have to give it the tools, the input for a technology such as an LLM, to do a good job. And so not only is a large language model being like a statistical model of text, you have to give it some text that contains patterns either in the training corpus or in the context window that you give it that allows it to use these patterns to create good documentation. So you as an engineer have to know like what is good documentation. Like the LM doesn't know, it just knows words. You have to know, okay, how can I create such a good documentation? Like what are patterns that make sense? So maybe is it like, oh, is it like a function docstring? Is that good documentation? Or is it maybe like an architectural overview? Again, this is like a social context kind of thing. Good documentation only makes sense when the reader of that documentation gets value out of it. If they get value out of it, then it's like valuable documentation. And if they don't get value out of it, then it's useless documentation. But the LM doesn't know that. Like maybe it could write like the most beautiful book about system architecture when actually what you need is like an API reference. So uh, so again, it's like, well, if you ask the LLM to generate documentation, it just generates whatever. Then maybe you should be more precise when you ask it to generate documentation. Like if you don't want inline doc strings, then just ask it to not put in online doc strings and put that into your system prompt or whatever. Um, and here, and this is weird that like Shreya writes that because you could imagine that um, techniques such as like, oh, like here's an example of how to write a good doc string, and putting that into your prompt is like a good way of having the model generate more of similar doc strings, right? Like, so if the doc string is too imperative, then ask it or show it how to write a doc string that is not imperative, but maybe only focuses on the important stuff, for example, or just write it yourself, right? Like if you know what the documentation should look like, you can't get the LLM to get there, then there's no reason for you to use the LLM to do that. And yeah, indeed, I actually she should put more prompt engineering in your cursor rules. I do. I'm going to show an example, but like I do have a bunch of things here. I'll go back to this like plan functionality which I have here. Um, I'm going to continue through the thread since it's fairly long. So yeah, if you don't tell an LM what to test, it will test things. And if you know what it should test for, then ask it to test that thing, right? It's like you as an engineer, you have to break it down for the LLM. And like the LLM, it's not like something with a soul walking around that like somehow has some responsibility. It's entirely a tool in your hand, like the same way as you wouldn't blame your keyboard for writing bad documentation if you type bad documentation on it. Um, and uh, so um, yeah, this is exactly the same thing. It's like ascribing some kind of magical thinking features to the LLM when really, um, I mean, maybe the point is to say they're horrible software engineers and then give a lot of examples. But I think there's more that Treya wants more out of it, which is like, how do I use LLMs to be a more a better engineer or more productive engineer, whatever whatever you like, some kind of better, right? And if you have heuristics on what implementation mistakes are, and these kind of comes like really quickly to your brain, saying like, oh, I've got like a tingly feeling that maybe this loop variable is going to be incorrect, and then say, hey, LLM, write unit tests to make sure that this loop variable is not incorrect. I think it might overflow. And if you give that to the LLM, of course, it's going to write, I guess, a fairly decent test that this variable is not going to overflow. And maybe it will even get that wrong, but then at least you'll have like the 15 lines of code around it that allow you to test that loop variable, and then maybe you still need to fix the test, and it's entirely on you to make sure that this test is the right thing. And if you don't, right, if you haven't, if you're not able to get an LM to do it, like maybe you need to practice more. Maybe you say like, I'm not interested in practicing figuring out how to trick the LLM into doing this right. I've got better things to do. That's perfectly fine, right? The thing is with these technologies, with LLMs, like no one really knows what they do. Like they're so alien and novel, and they change all the time, and like all these things get added. That I think continuously trying to do things that are outside of your comfort zone, outside of your skills, is really useful. Go back to things that you failed at earlier and say like, well, maybe I could try again now that I've like programmed more with it. Um, and um, so um, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. If you train people on isolated code snippets, if they're humans, I think you might be able to get like good engineers out of it, right? But LMs are not humans; they're just going to be, yeah. If you train them on code snippets, but then you're going to get like some non-engineers out of it. And LLMs, however, are trained on more than code snippets, right? Like they train on blog articles and like books and stuff like that. So they do have a sense of the statistical model of language about good software engineering, if that makes sense, right? They're able to put words together that lead to being good software engineering decisions, but they don't have a brain. So it's you as an engineer. Um, so anyway, let me try making like an example, just to see, to potentially show more more maybe a little bit more concretely what I'm having in mind. Like, there's a ton of responses to this. I really should get on X somehow. Um, it's kind of, I find it troubling that so many software engineers kind of don't see that it's just a tool. Like it's weird to me. It's I'm sure they see it just as just a tool, but like not going further. Like, well, if Vim macros are not going to be engineers, right? Like you won't assume that a Vim macro is going to be an engineer, but like I can make some pretty good engineering with Vim macros because I can use them to do some stuff that I wouldn't be able to do without them. And maybe I suck at Vim macros, and I'll spend like my time reading a Vim macro manual and just like not getting anywhere, and I could have done it by hand. Like that doesn't change. It's just like tools. But so I'm going to show something. So I've got an empty project, and I figured I'm going to do like a, I'm going to make like the thing I was thinking is like, oh, it's a web application. It's like a web API that, when you give it an animal like a cat, it's going to return meow. And if you give it like a dog, it's going to make woof. And kind of expanding on that, right? So the first thing I want to do is just like create a garbage PHP app that does that, because like everybody seems to think that PHP is garbage. So I might have just used that. So this is Cursor, and I'm going to create a crappy PHP app to print out animal sounds. So if you want the sound for a dog, it says woof, and cat, it says meow. Make the code not good at all, inconsistent, a little bit broken, weird. This is not part of what we want our show. I just want to have like a starting. Um, so I do have a license, right? Oh, and there's an update as well. Agent improvement, December, YOLO mode. I do have 044, don't I? 04480. All right, whatever. So I'm going to assume that it did like crappy shit here. So we've got animals, PHP, and then it says animal sounds. It kind of has like a form to do that. Yeah, but this looks like proper garbage. This is kind of like what I wanted. And it kind of is already too clever. It does this like indirection thing. So I'm gonna indirection. Jesus Christ. So this is not part of what I want to show. I just want to have like something that's really bad to start with, and I might as well use an LLM because every code I write personally is just like amazing. All right, so this is kind of code that I had in mind when I was thinking of like what could I show. I'm gonna show this. So actually, I'm gonna start a new terminal. If I go into my repo, and then I do this, hopefully this works. Localhost h animals php. All right, so doggy makes sound. It makes like woof. And this looks like really, really crappy. So imagine that this is a big enterprise application, right? I know it's kind of hard to excuse me. Excuse me for the coughing. I've been sick the last couple of days, a week. Starting point to show LLMs suck at coding. Imagine this is like a big legacy factory application, right? Hopefully this is bad enough that you can recognize some of your legacy experience in here. Obviously, real legacy code is going to be way, 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 way worse. But so anyway, we're tasked to refactor this, right? And so I kind of I have something in my head already, but I'm just going to go step by step. I want to turn this, into like a really nice looking, like with multiple language support application with a web API, like tooling and documentation and unit tests, like all of that kind of, professional development stuff. Um, but I'm faced with this, right? And imagine in real life, this would be like 100,000 lines of code or whatever. The first thing I would do, right? Like I wouldn't go in here, is like make this into a really nice web application with multiple language support and a REST API and documentation and unit tests. Like this is not what I'm going to do. But I think this is what a lot of software engineers think LLMs should be able to do. Either because it got hyped as that, like I can totally understand being fed up with the hype of like being, oh, LLMs are going to like replace people and they're such great software engineers, when maybe they've also picked up like people like me saying like LLMs are like, the best invention since sliced bread. But then extrapolate that I'm meaning something like this when I'm just like, well, as an engineer, I can write crazy software. I can make a really nice web application using LLMs, but that's not how I do it, right? Um, this is what I do. This is what I think in my head, but it's not how I'm using an LLM to do it. But, let's try it out. Let's see what happens. Obviously, it's going to stick with PHP. This is Claude, so actually it's already going to do too good of a job here. It's annoying. I'm gonna use Haiku is probably gonna be too good as well. Um, but yeah, this one already starts doing things like, well, do I want Laravel? And the first thing is like right, like why did the LLM do this decision? This is not a decision that the LLM should be doing. This is a decision with my team. This is a decision based on what I know. This is a decision I'm deciding what the product is going to be. So this shows perfectly like, well, this thing is just like diving straight in and making decisions that it has no capacity of taking. Um, because because it doesn't have the social context, and also just like why is it doing this? So gonna go with it. Because it still is kind of impressive, right? Like this is not the worst idea. If we were to, if you were giving this instruction as a human, this is like not totally not the worst idea to do, right? You say like, well, I'm going to use Laravel, I'm going to create a new project, I'm going to download it, I'm going to run this, and this actually kind of works, and right, like, um, so still like LLMs are pretty impressive, and I think that's like the other thing is like people playing with it, they're like, holy shit, it's able to do this, so of course it's going to be able to do the whole thing. Or maybe they've had success with one thing, but like of course once they what it encounters like big legacy, is just like doesn't work anymore. um I'm not sure why it's hanging. Oh shit, what did I do? Continue. um So right, like I can let it yap on, and like it will create like a ton of things, and will create all of this crazy stuff, and it will go on and on and on for hours, and of course at the end it's not going to work, right? Because it's just like it's created too much, and there's like subtle error somewhere, and then you're stuck with these like 20,000 lines of code that you kind of have to review. Like, what the fuck do I know what all of this is? This is like a nightmare for me as an engineer to say like, oh yeah, yeah, let's put this into production. Like I have no idea what all of this stuff is. It kind of has been generated by an LLM or an LLM using tools. It's just horrible, right? Like totally understand someone being in front of this and be like, I want no, like this sucks. Um, but this is what you get when you ask an LLM to do it. Like this is the kind of stuff that you get. And if you use something like Sonnet, it will just push the boundary a little bit further of like how long it stays consistent or so. I'm gonna come back because my throat hurts. So basically, I think this is like kind of, you know, kind of giving away your role as an engineer and like your integrity as an engineer as well. If I want to turn this into a proper web application, like now I'm turning on my engineering brain. I know a lot of the coding is going to be done for me. So really I should think about what I want to be doing. And so usually what I do this on paper because I'm a snob and I like my fountain pens and whatever. But um, I'll just open up a file. I'd be like, we want to just like stream of consciousness, write stuff down. We make this into a nice little web application that is responsive and has multiple language support and a REST API and documentation and unit tests, right? So that's kind of what I want to do. What kind of technology do I want to use? And it's like I like Golang, HTMX. I want to use like Go templates for the HTML, Markdown for documentation. And so here I want to have like an installation guide. I want to have like a developer guide, and I want to have like a user guide, right? Something like that. So what is good documentation? There's books that have been written about it. It's you can't just say like, oh, good documentation. You have to think like, who is the documentation for and why, and like what questions should it be answering and stuff like that. So I'm gonna make an executive decision here that this is good documentation. It might change based on your project. Unit tests. So I do want to have like live HTML clicking tests, not unit tests, because in this context, it's like unit tests are too simple. Multi-language support, want to be able to delegate translation to individual translators, maybe some kind of tools to manage the translations. This is where I personally start to get like way too much into the weeds. But I'm gonna think about this. So okay, so currently we have a animals PHP application that serves a ugly web UI and then just renders out new HTML, right? So the first thing we want is to have like, have documentation of the current legacy application. So there's different ways to get there, right? And then maybe I want to have like a migration guide documentation. So a migration guide for current users. I mean, it's all a little bit contrived, right? But so now I already kind of have this, right? Like this is my job as an engineer, and so imagine that I want to show this to my colleagues. Like this is not a set of decisions I should be making for myself. It's I want to turn this into like a really nice RFC, right? And so so maybe how do I make a nice RFC out of this? Continuing with the stream of consciousness kind of thing, right? I'm actually going to add like stream of consciousness architecture, software architecture to modernize animals.php. So this is kind of important, not just for me to know what this is about, but I'm going to feed this into an LLM later on, right? And LLMs like words. They don't know anything other than words or rather tokens. So the words you choose are really important. The kind of like the grammar, like the syntax is a little bit less important, but it still makes sense. So, just write a document that's kind of understandable by a human. So why is my typing so bad today? Technology, choices, and this is my goal. And as I'm writing these titles, I'm already thinking like an engineer. I'm like, oh, well, what's the structure of the RSC I kind of want to have? Current state, working with the tasks for preparing the migration. So this is kind of meta thoughts about RFC structure to show my colleagues and get feedback on my proposal. So how do I turn this into here's like pros and cons is good, like overview of the problem, some concrete example of actual problems we currently have, benefits of the new approach, tentative plan, stuff like that, right? And so what I can do now as using an LLM is like I do have something like LLMs. I think of them as like transformers. Like I mean, literally in the word GPT, you have transformer. They transform language. So I kind of have this, and this has my thinking ingrained into it. Maybe it's missing context that can be. If I show this to my mom, she will have like no idea of what I'm talking about, or my father for that matter, because there's a lot of just like implied knowledge that might or might not need to be added to these things. Like the animals PHP is like implied context, right? Like the fact, right, what is REST API, what is Golang, what is HTMX, like all of these things, maybe they do need to be explained for the team, right? It's like the team doesn't know why Golang would be better than PHP. So again, this is me thinking as an engineer. It's like, oh, I want to create a good document. Like, what do I need to have for a good document? The LLM's not going to know. They also need a small intro to HTMX, right? Also explain what makes for good documentation, audience, purpose, document type, right? And maybe this like translation, the translation part is optional and is something that is not necessary for an MVP. Like this is also something that the LLM won't be able to know from here because I haven't written it here. So maybe I'll write it down here, something like that. So this is me thinking. This is me doing engineering. This is me doing stuff that I know the LLM won't be able to do. But if I tell the LLM that this is something that I want, then it will be able to translate this language into better language. And so the way I do this is like create rfc.md that explains, that contains my proposal to move from the current, I'm going to attach the code, implementation to a new implementation. Use the meta thoughts in the ideas file to as a direction for a good RFC, right? So I kind of know from my experience that like Sonnet is probably going to do a good job here. So I'll just do it. But I've broken down the problem so that it is able to do a good job for it, right? I haven't just said like, oh, make an RFC. I want to make this like a nice web application, which still is like a valuable thing to do. And I'm going to show why in a minute. But for now, I'm just going to let it create this RFC. And, then I'll look over it. And then this is not code. This is much, much easier for me to go over and say like, well, the LLM like made a bunch of like decisions here that are not necessary. Maybe this is not important. Maybe it's missing something. Like I still need to do that. But with experience, you'll start to like understand what works, what doesn't work, what is something you can just skim and assume is good, to something that is, something that needs to be fully limited, to be fully gone over. So depending on how much you like blah blah, this is typical LLM slop. It's like, oh, this, we want to make it better because the current version is not as good, so we can make it better. It's kind of like useless language, so I usually like remove it. Or things you can do is like, no, just explain what we are doing, not why. So you can start to edit your RFC again with an LM, because this is just faster than me writing it by hand, right? So yes, this is enough for me. I mean, it's already in the title, so in practice, I would, remove it, but it was just to show you that stuff. So I hate this. This is LLM slop. It's like, maybe make it concrete, like add a concrete. So I'm actually not sure if it's going to be able to do this here. But I'm going to do like add a concrete example of why business, oh my God, business logic is mixed with presentation and animals PHP. Maybe I'll be like, yeah, no, I should show this to my colleagues. And so I might add something like this with code snippets and more clear and concise natural language. Because this saves me time to do it by hand. Maybe by hand would be faster, but I kind of, it's slow because I'm streaming this. But let's say like, oh, I decide like this is a good way of doing it, right? So I have this, and then no separation of concerns or proper error handling. I don't know what separation of concern is supposed to mean. So I'll edit this, right? So I would maybe do this. Oh, it's actually already suggesting like, presentation. So I'm going to remove this. And this is how I work, right? It's like, I want to create a good RFC. Can the LLM help me? Yeah, it can kind of help me because I'm too lazy to write all of this. So current problems. I don't know what limited user feedback is. This is not a problem. So let's say that are the problems. There's no I don't know why it would be difficult to add new features. Hard to maintain consistent code style. This is this I call this LLM slop. It's like it's in the training corpus. Too bad. It's probably in the instructaining corpus a lot. All right, so this is I don't need this. All right. This is cool. This is why I would like to use Go. Can't really think of something else that I would add compared to PHP. And yeah, this is how I like it as well. And then Go templates, yeah, whatever. Key features. So just actually, I'm going to go back to Composer. I'm going to be, oops. I don't know if I can add this to Composer. Explain why we need a REST API as instead of the current one entry. So I gave it the number here because I hope that it's going to be able to understand that I want to replace this. I might need to be a little bit more precise. That's why numbering is great. You can like much more easily tailor that stuff. So you know, here I'm not even looking at what it generated. It's like because now I'm going to look at what it generated. So I don't care about this. But yeah, that's the reason why I want to have like a REST API. And these are more like features of the REST API. I don't care about that. And so, you know, maybe my colleagues hate having this kind of language here. So I might ask it like, oh, rewrite technology stack to not use bullet point lists, but instead clear paragraphs aimed at experienced developers, clear and concise. It's using LLMs as transformers, right? Like this would take me a lot of time, but it's good engineering. Like I know that my colleagues want this and it will help us move forward faster. Thus, this is an engineering decision, but now the LLM, it wouldn't be able to do this on its own, but like when I ask it to, it's like able to do this pretty well, right? Because I know that, you know, whatever it had before, it's able to transform now, right? And I can literally look at this way. So cool. You get the idea, right? Like this would be my first step of engineering with an LLM is just like, oh, well, think about what we want. And if you remember in ideas, I had at the bottom is like, oh, the team doesn't know why Golang would be better than PHP. That's why we have this section, obviously, right? Like this is not rocket science. It didn't add this because like magically it knew that the team, it's literally, it added this in this order because I asked it to. And same for the introduction to HTMX, right? But I knew that this would be great to have, so I just asked it to have it. And I didn't tell it in detail. Like now I could maybe work on it in detail, right? It's like be like, well, explain how the, right, like in why Golang over PHP, explain the maintainability part in practice. Because people have never used Golang, maybe I want to show them how this, you know, how the maintainability actually works. So I want to have like, oh, it's probably going to say like, oh, this is Go format, and then there's Go test, and then there's like a Go mod and that kind of stuff. Maybe not. In this case, if it doesn't do this, you know, maybe I'll add it. But you know, maybe I'll decide like, well, this is better than the danger here being always like it's kind of easy to be like dazzled by the LLM output and then forget that there's something important you should add to it, which is why I write my ideas MD upfront, right? I kind of want to have maybe I'll just go on a walk after this as well to make sure I have a high quality document. But so, you get the idea. I will do the same for like the implementation plan. Like, I don't know if we use weeks for this or whatever. Like, this is based on the team structure. And in the worst case, like, I won't write any code with the LLM, but already having this document is just like a gazillion times better than not having it. So did my LLM make my project like that much better? Like, it's entirely possible that without this document, you end up making a wrong decision, and then like you put 3 months of engineering time down the drain because no one made like a nice RFC. I think that's one of the reasons why LLMs are such a game changer. Is like we can do things right now, right? It's like this took me what 20 minutes. It probably would have taken me like a whole day before just to make it like as carefully as I would make it with an LLM. It's been 20 minutes with me talking all the time as well. Like when I do this by hand, it's just like way faster. And the fact that it's so fast, it allows me to like, well, maybe I can actually legit take the afternoon off and say like, well, I've done as much as I can today. I'm gonna, from my experience, it's like always makes sense to sleep on these kinds of things, and then go back. I mean, maybe that's the best thing to do at that point, right? It's just like go home. So it's great for work-life balance if you don't have someone breathing down your neck. If you have someone breathing down your neck instead of like looking at your output, then think about what that means in terms of labor and your place in the workforce. Or maybe you'll just like start writing other stuff, or you just like continuously be like, yeah, fuck it, I'll just implement this, and along with the RFC, I'll just like give a full prototype, because that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to be like, fuck the team. I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to build this thing because I rule. So, but the cool thing is like now we have an RFC, and the RFC is not just useful for us, it's also useful for the LLM. So based on the plan, let's look at the plan that I did. Set up the Go, configure the build system, create the initial documentation. So that's cool. Implement the REST API is the next step. Well, maybe. Actually, I'm going to add something. This here is like just port the current app to Golang naively. Right, like that's going to step 1A. It's going to be this. Then the core features and all of this thing, right? So now that we have an RFC, right? It's like I don't know what the initial documentation is. Actually, I'm going to call this 1A, and then I'm going to call this 1B. It's like create the description, describe, describe UI, make exhaustive list of animals and sounds. Like this is kind of the documentation of the legacy system that we want. If it was like a real legacy system, you want like API references, like maybe an architectural overview, like at least a user overview. Here, we're just going to create this. And then maybe we create the Go project structure. All right. So anyway, we've got an RFC. I'm actually gonna let all of these things in here. Do plan 1, right? So now I can refer to this plan and say like, this is broken down to small tasks that I know that the LLM is going to be able to do. And so here it's going to go ahead and build all of this. I'm in chat, so it's not going to do this. Let me go back to Composer and then say like implementation 1. Same thing, except here is going to create the things. So here I would like kind of verify what it would do, and I mean this is like kind of all good. And here it's like it's too eager. Like that's a problem with cursor. It's like step 1 and only that. Stop at 1A. These are the kind of things that you often have to tell it. So I already has created all of this, but so yeah, it's a little bit too eager. Let me remove all this garbage. This is the new agent mode. Also, it's like a little bit too much. So I'm gonna go back to something that's a little bit more rudimentary, and like maybe I'll take like a worse model just to show you. Implementation plan 1 only up to 1A. So it did step 1A, and it kind of created an initial thing. So this is kind of like, only up to 1A, not including 1A. This the other thing is like LLMs are statistical, so maybe it got it once right, or maybe it got it wrong, but if you regenerate, it will get it better. Like those kinds of things. It seems really, really eager to actually get stuff done. Only initialize. So now I'm just like gonna implement phase 1, only implement the project structure without actual files, and then configure the build system without actual implemented files. So here, right? Like actually, it's good that it's good that it's so eager, because it kind of shows you what LLMs are prone to do. But like now that I've restricted it, it's just gonna create the Go mod and the make file, and then oh man, it is really really set on like building this shit, isn't it? All right, but anyway, we can accept that, right? Like we can deal with this. So create the initial documentation describing the legacy application, animals PHP, create in doc01 legacy application.md. This is phase 1A, right? Mind you, we're on Haiku. So I don't expect anything super clever here. It's probably going to be good enough. It probably have like a little bit too much yapping in there. But also, this is going to be something we want to read and clean up anyway. So I'm going to stick with the worst model just to show you what things can be like. If you use Sonnet, there's a lot of stuff that I would just like go much faster through, right? So typical LLM yapping is like this application structure. Like right, like I'll mostly like remove a lot of things. Like I don't care about all of this stuff. So I want supported animals and sounds. Yeah, that is good. Technical depth indicators, like this is more yapping. So this is not what I wanted. So let me go back to the composer. No, actually describe the behavior and features of the current application, right? Don't think about the migration plan at all, just current application. Because here it was probably confused because it had the RFCMD in the context, right? I might be able to just like, I might maybe just have to remove that altogether. But it's Haiku, so it's probably going to be yapping a lot. So can do this again, but you can see that here it has add this. So I don't care this. I don't care about this. and it's still like set on telling me why it's shit, the current one. But yeah, so I'll clean this up as I would to make this a good engineering document, right? Like I don't want to have like 10,000 tokens that are just like slop. But this is good, right? So I'm going to say like, well, this is a good description of the legacy application, right? So if we go back to the RFC, the next step would be port the current application to Golang. Now we have like a really nice legacy application of this. So if I actually go to the composer and I just give it the legacy application and animals PHP, port this to Golang using the current setup directories. So here I'll go back to the agent just so that it starts like looking at what the files already look like. But so this should be enough to port this to Golang, right? It's like the legacy PHP stuff and then a guide of how it works and like how it should do it. I wonder if it's going to misinterpret that. Like I realize this column, I would actually remove that. It's just going to confuse the LLM. But yeah, this is roughly kind of what I was thinking of, right? So you have a slash and it parses the form and then it just like see it misunderstood this. It's funny. You'll see if I remove this, you have to be really careful with LLMs and like now that I removed so much, like everything that's in there is kind of like really relevant for the LLM. It's going to try to match it. So I'm going to go back and I remove this. And now it has more freedom to do something that's like self-consistent. Oh shit, what did I do? No. Oh well, this is good enough. Are you done? I don't know if it thinks it needs to do more. Oh, it has to do a changelog. This, by the way, the changelog that it creates is like something I have in my system prompt. So here, when you modify code, add a changelog in the root directory, blah, 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 and then I have something to do plans, which I've been building the plan like by hand right now. So now there's probably, because of this description here, right? Like I probably don't even need to really show the legacy implementation, but I could. But it now has like a guidance to look through this nonsense here and actually create these this like decent thing. Did it kind of? Yeah, it has two, right? Like this is a leftover from before. This is also leftover from before, isn't it? All right, but so we have animals.go. That's good. And then internal, we have animal.go. Does it even use it? It doesn't use it, right? So this is the PHP nonsense. And then if we look at animals.go, it's like much nicer, right? Like it still has this kind of like stuff which has copied from the animals PHP because it's haiku. It's copied this like very one by one. But yeah, I mean it's good for now. Like this is the way we would do an initial if we had like some legacy stuff. We would stick closer to this kind of stuff. Like could be maybe a different database or things like this. So we're gonna accept this. Pretty sure it works, but let's try it. Where is it? It's there. Go run command. Oh, why did it stop? Funcman HTTP listen and serve. I think it's because port HG8080 is there. So one thing I could do is like add error handling on the listen and serve call, or I could do it by hand, right? Like I just wanted to show this what you can do with the LLM. Obviously in real life, if I just wanted to add these two lines, I wouldn't spend like 50 minutes waiting here. I would just do it by hand. But this is kind of what I wanted to generate. So I already had it in my mind as an engineer. This is what I want to do. And then do I use the LLM to get there or not? It's like, maybe here I just spent money and GPU time to wait for something I could have just like typed out, it just, if I reject it and I would have done it by hand, I would actually have used the tab completion model of Cursor, right? It's just like really is good for that kind of stuff. So anyway, if I try again, now it's going to run. And then if I go here, localhost 8080, it actually is broken, huh? So this is where the exhaustive testing comes in. Like, of course, you do need to have exhaustive testing. So if I do handle animal sounds, then it does what? It just like prints out the sound. So why is this submit? So no, submitting the form should print out the animal sound at the top and then the form. So this is haiku stuff. If I had done it with Sonnet, maybe we should go back and do it with Sonnet, and you'll see like the difference in quality. I'm not very experienced with haiku, so see, I've never encountered this before. So maybe this is a haiku thing or whatever. But if I go back to the days where models were smaller, like GPT 3.5, I would have been much more careful, and I would have guided it a little bit more to do this stuff, right? It's so you have to test your shit. Like there's just like no way around it, right? But so, cool. Like we ported a legacy application. So ported legacy application. And so now I'll show you with Sonnet, just, while we can. So I'll go back to this, port this to Golang using the thing, and then now I'm going to use Sonnet, and you'll see Sonnet is a pretty good coder in the small. It's probably going to do like it's going to make like a bunch of refactoring decisions by itself that usually are pretty good, like better than what I would do usually. So when I do Sonnet, like often I just like literally yeet the code out because I'm like, yeah, this is Sonnet. It's probably going to be good enough. So let's see, right? Like you can see already, it's created a struct and it's created a hash table. Like it's basically doing too much for what I actually want to show. It's too good at this point. And this is why I think a lot of engineers just like kind of really taken aback by how amazing LLMs are until they aren't, right? Because the only difference between Sonnet and Haiku is that it's able to pattern match a little bit further, but not that much further, right? Like it's able to pattern match like maybe 3 engineering steps or whatever you want to think of them. It's able to say like, oh well, like wouldn't it be good if we had like a wrapper function and like a hash table and like a struct, but it doesn't know about HTMX or whatever else we want to do, right? Still, like this is pretty impressive, and I really enjoy this kind of stuff. It doesn't know the package names. This is something I put into my cursor rules. So there's a good chance that this is broken here. No, so this is good. This is good. Fantastic. So where is this thing? Comment animals. And so if I go back here, right? You can right, like you see how more clever Sonnet is. It did like a bunch of decisions. Like it's hard to think of it in terms of decision. It's just like created code that looks like it has more decisions that have been made doing it. Like it has more software engineering to it, but it's just LLM output, right? And those decisions that it made, you might decide they're good or not, but all of these decisions are always within a context, usually a social context of what good engineering is and what your goal is. So sometimes it aligns, sometimes it doesn't, and you as a user of the tool have to learn where the tool does a good job or not, right? and how far to trust it. So I've come to trust Sonnet to do this kind of like, that kind of scope. I will probably do a pretty good job at just like figuring out good patterns, which is great because often these are patterns that I either don't know or that I forgot about or I'm like too tired to think about. Um, so let it. I'm actually going to go back to the haiku version. Just it's like more interesting to show what I want to show with the haiku stuff, just because it's worse. So, are we back at our previous state? No, we still have the handler. So let me delete this. And then within commands, we have animals.go, and then we can delete this. So we're back to the haiku state, right? All right, cool. Let me grab some water. All right, moving on. I don't remember what we wanted to do, but it's great. Like I have an implementation plan here. So we did this, right? One clever way to do this is to also just use this structure. So here I'm going to use the chat, and it's like turn implementation plan into a list of to-do items, same items, check off phase one. Because that's what we did. And this is nice because it just like tells us in the LLM like what else needs to be done, and it's like a quick way to say right, like the REST API, for example. So before we do that, I'm going to do a little bit of refactoring in the small, right? It's like here we're back in haiku mode, right? So let's switch this back to haiku. And let's go back here. We're in normal mode, and it's like now our engineering brain comes in. It's like, oh, well, what are the things that we want to do here? And so do the following: consistent animal sound syntax, hash map to look up animal sound, go template for the HTML rendering, custom struct for animal sound. And then in the order, I'll put this in. All right. So I'm not going to trust the LM to do the right choice. Like if I do make this nice, refactor, if I just tell it that, I know Sonnet would do a good job in this case. Haiku, I don't know. And also, like, this is so open-ended, right? Like, there's many different ways of completing this. I'm going to show, like, actually in practice. So here it's able to find, like, the good patterns. It's not freaking Anthropic is just too good in their stuff. They even have, like, a registry pattern. They make a struct for the registry. They make, like, a server. So because I said refactor, they're just, like, going full in, like, clean code, whatever, cargo culting, what they think is, like, good refactoring, right? It actually goes too far. I don't think this is good. I think this is too much. But it's because I told it refactoring, right? And so if I go back and do this again, right? Let's see how different the second time around is. Oh shit! It's exactly the same. I don't know how high the temperature is. So great, superb, amazingly clean. In fact, I'm just changing the words around a little bit and maybe show how, it's, wow, it's still doing the same stuff. It's like, this is crazy. Let's remove the name refactor. Man, this is crazy. All right, I'm a little bit taken aback that it's so consistently doing the animal registry. Am I missing something? Bob Martin, clean code, pristine, functional. I don't know. This is a funny experiment to do, by the way, just like adding tokens, seeing what happens. I Jesus fuck, like there has to be something else going on here. Better. So, all right, I this registry stuff is like. So I wonder how much Cursor has added to their prompt as well. But it's funny. It seems like the word refactor brings in the registry. So it's weird. Like I don't know if there's something in the cache as well. If it's like an anthropic reinforcement as well, that they have a lot of registry refactorings in there. That's curious. This is the kind of stuff that I practice, right? This is experience. So, oh yeah, it's crazy. It does the animal registry. That's really interesting. Um, nicer. I like this. We're gonna go with nicer. Um, it does the animal registry. It's like really funny. But yeah, anyway, right? Like this is, um, if you let it to its own device, it's gonna do something. Sometimes it'll just do something that really wants to do, like this registry thing. But it's gonna make decisions that are not really what you already know you want, right? Like I already know I want this. And so if I really wanted to have this and I started like chatting with the model, so like no, I don't want general, like don't make a registry. It's just gonna add like context that's useless to a long discussion. It's like starting to go into spaghetti code. So I usually stay at this very first box for quite a while until I'm like, okay, well, maybe it didn't get like 100% of it, of what of what I wanted, but it got like 95% of it. If I don't get 95% of it, I'll tweak it until I know how to do. Or if I really can't get to it, it means I broke down my problem not well enough, and maybe I know how to break it down better, or I have to think about it more, right? It's like for some reason I wasn't able to break it down in such a way that an LM can do it. So either I have something to think about or I just do it by hand, or but I'm not gonna like kind of brute force my way into the LM with it. It should be able to do it like in a reproducible way that I understand. Um, if I do it like this, right? Like I'm pretty sure it's gonna do the right thing because there's not much for it to not do the right thing. If I tell it like use a custom struct, right? Like that, then it's pretty clear that it's going to do a custom struct. If I say it should have a consistent syntax, I'm not fully sure what it means, but it already cleaned up some things. And like woof is like uppercase, so in this case I'll just fix it by hand. But in the context of a legacy application, maybe it required more prompt engineering. Maybe I would need to do a step where I just clean up the syntax. So actually, let's assume that cleaning up the syntax is something that I can't just like fix by hand quickly. I do actually want to have the LLM do it, right? So consistent. So maybe it's just like maybe it's just that, right? Maybe it's just like a simple matter of prompt engineering. So right, like and here you can see how strongly statistical these things are. Just like pattern matching is like it literally reduced hop to a single word. Because yes, woof meow is a single word. If I were to do the same thing with Sonnet, I don't think it would do hop as a single word. I will be wrong. This is the kind of stuff that goes under practice. Let's see if it does hop. Oh, it does thump. It's clever, right? Like it really is too clever. Sonnet is clever. It has this cleverness to it. Um, so let's go back to haiku. Let's assume that hop is okay. And right, so maybe this would have been like a way of fixing it, just like to pure prompt engineering. But maybe it needs like its own thing, like its own step. And like one way of doing these kinds of like whole steps, we want to clean up the animal sounds. First, list all the animal sounds as they currently are. 2, describe why it is inconsistent. 3, describe consistent proposal. 4, migrate. What I'm doing here, I don't really like tell it what to do. I tell it to tell me what to do and then do it. Is I'm using like the auto-regressive nature of LLMs. I'm going to have it fill its own context with stuff that is easy for me to verify, but also make sure that it stays on Rails. So I ask it to output that will create better output is like how I put it, right? It's like, because I'm going to list all the, oh shit, did I just delete that? No. For migrate. I want to have all the animal sounds in one small little list, not spread across many tokens. If you think of legacy, maybe these animal sounds would be spread across like 500 files. I don't want the LLM to always need these 500 files. I want it to list just these sounds. Then step number 2, not necessarily that important here either, right? Because it's so trivial. But it would be a good reference for humans to be like, well, how was it before? Like, what was the problem exactly? That's kind of a document I want to preserve. So good to have in there. And like describing what is inconsistent might also probably just like make it easier to understand what is consistent. So just to show you what this looks like, if we decided that unifying these strings is like too complicated, it's like, right, like current animal sounds, woof, meow, mew, moo, hop, hop. So it actually misunderstood the whole thing a little bit because it started touching the code, but like that's fine. Or I could do only the strings, right? Like adjust my prompt and then try again. So I'll usually just go back and edit the prompt instead of having a conversation or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it still did the global variable, whatever. I'm fine with that, right? Like this was my first step, and then I could just go back and then just go back here, except we now have the consistent sound syntax, right? So now I can do the second step. This would be breaking down a problem so that the LLM can do each step if it was too much in one go. Because now obviously the whole thing is like a little bit easier to get right? So oh, we did this in the chat. Whatever. So it won't update this here, right? But so now we have like a slightly cleaned up animals.go. I'm going to I mean, I'm sure it works. It works fine, but if you do want to test it out, then why not? Oh, it's not working? Yeah, actually break it. Function lower not defined. So this is haiku stuff. This is like the stuff that irritates people where it's like, oh, well, lower doesn't define. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Then just remove it. Or don't remove it and say like, well, lower is not defined. And I, as an engineer, add Spring template funcs, right? Like I know, oh, there's like a so either this is a way, but actually I wanted to have Sprig. So engineering decision, right? Like there's no way. Like this is clearly like a statistical model error, and I'm not going to get upset about it. I just know like, yeah, it's a statistical model. It's just like fucked up in this case. Maybe I'll remove my thing. I'll make an engineering decision to fix it. So I'll just fix it, right? Like I'm an engineer. That's what I'm here for, is not get upset about my tools. Just be like, I know what my tools are for. in how to do it. I think this will work. I broke the doggy thing. Did I? Why doesn't it do doggy? So cow it does, rabbit it doesn't. Why does it do the cow and not the rabbit? Selected dot name. This is kind of weird, this template data here. I don't want this. I don't care about this shit. And so here I'm doing like I'm writing code by hand, right? Like why not? And convert this to data selected. This is so weird. But we're going to continue. Add logging with 0 log debug level. I'm not going to fix it. I'm just going to add, like, this is something you can do with LLMs, right? Like, oh, what's a way to figure out a tricky bug that maybe the LLM introduced that I wouldn't have introduced if I had written it by hand? Well, it's adding logging, for example, is a good way to just make your application better in general. And it's like super annoying to do this without LLMs, and it's really fun to do it with LLMs because I'm done, right? It configures this console writer, and then I'm right. It's like with caller info because I know how to do it by hand, but maybe I forgot. So right, like now at least I have logging, and I can be like selected animal, total animals, preparing template data. It's maybe a little bit more logging. Whoops. Log if exists or not exists. Like this is the stuff I love LLMs for. Sure, it's just like really stupid stochastic parrot stuff, but like it's super good. And so it's gonna Firefox. All right, on animal not found in science map, animal is equal to, all right, so but doggy. Animal not found in sounds map, doggy. Why? Right. So because of the logging, we found our error. Cow, kitty, cow, rabbit. Cool, right? Cleaner Golang implementation. So notice I didn't like fight the LLM or like be like, oh, the LLM couldn't do something. It's just like, well, I couldn't do it. So what's the best way to do this? And some of it is traditional engineering. Some of it is like maybe using a bigger model, using just like practicing your prompt engineering. But for example, knowing that adding debug logging, like I didn't look at the code, I just accepted it, right? Because like nothing can go wrong really. And then I refined it. If I needed more logging, then I added more logging, right? And at this point, it's also like something where the tab completion model is really good, right? Like something you need to practice as well. I knew it would output this line. Like I just knew. I just know that if I go here and I press here, it's gonna add this. Like I just knew in my head that tab completing here would be this, but maybe I need the animals. So maybe I'll do this, right? Like I kind of knew that it would do this, but maybe it didn't do this the way I wanted. So maybe I'll do it as an interface, but also, yeah, in any case, you kind of get a heuristic in your brain of how to work with these things. The same way you get fluent with Vim, right? Or like with VS Code or whatever. It's like you have to build up this muscle slash brain memory. So anyway, let's going back to our FC. Now that we have this fairly consistent thing here, we can start adding a REST API, right? It's like build the REST API part of rfc.md, right? And then and check it off phase 2. So we're back in haiku territory. So I hope that it does too much stuff wrong. Also, it's rewriting the whole file. It's adding chi. I definitely don't want to have chi in there, right? So it's like this here, use echo. And I'm not doing a dialogue, right? I'm just like, well, my prompt was wrong. I decomposed my problem badly. Let's go back and just decompose it correctly. What is it yapping about here? It's like literally adding like a thing to add animal sounds. Yeah. So here I would just be like, what else did it do here? It removed the form, so we need to tell it to keep the form. So there's all these like little things here that Haiku misunderstands. So only add a new get route, keep the current form as it is, and then and I hope that to keep the current form as it is, it will still like understand to migrate it to Echo. I don't know. I know Sonnet would get it, but I'm not sure if Haiku will get it. It added a template renderer. Like it has so much cargo cult in there. It's like crazy. Like by cargo cult, it means it's just like has been trained on design patterns, which make Sonnet a really good software engineer, I think. But I don't know, man. So did it add HTMX? Is that why you used the template renderer? It didn't add HTMX. Why did it check it off? That's the fun of writing, of working with a smaller model, right? It's like going to do a lot of these little things. We can look at it here with so what it did with Haiku. Let's see if that works. Declared and not used temple render form / render form template not used. All right, well, Haiku. I mean Haiku. I would definitely look at this much more closely. I'm operating with like Sonnet brain, which is fine. Like it kind of is good to be in that spot where I don't actually know how the model's going to behave, and it's going to fly around left and right and confuse me. So we have the REST API endpoint does this, and it does the same function here, and then returns COK. Here it moved the template in here, has the render, has the API, and then I don't know why I checked this off. This is not a good pattern either. All right. Interesting, huh? I don't know what's going on here. Why was it able to do cow? Why is it switched like this? Do they switch their order? Huh. All right, it's because of the hash table, huh? Oh yeah. So because of the hash table, these are not ordered and they're rendered in order. So whatever. So I have the REST API, but right, like I don't really know how to call it. So I want to have tests. So I'm going to do some really stupid testing, right? It's like create a bash script that checks the API endpoints. Is like, well, just give me a bash script to test my legacy application or whatever. And this is something that LMs are great for. Like before, I would have either like written some Postman stuff or whatever. Here, I can really just like make a really nice, in this case, bash script. And I mean, I don't trust Haiku, but I think it probably got that one right. Um, and no. Right, I'm just gonna run it, and then it does this, which is cool. And I would probably break it, see that it probably catches the breaking stuff. But within a few seconds, I had like a really nice shell script that does that, right? So if I stop my server and I run the shell script, man, it like even has like really nice error messages. It's cool, right? And then if I break my REST API by saying animal YOLO. No. Right, I'm gonna break my beautiful REST API, and then I get these like really nice little colored things. Isn't that just super cool? Um, so in this case, you know, I'd be like, yeah, this is great. Oh, it even updated the README. Really nice. So it does these little surprising things, which you know are delightful. So added shell script to check endpoints. To go back to the original premise, right, which was this thread here, you can see maybe how different of views of LLMs are here. Maybe like I don't expect it to be a great coder. In fact, I'm like consistently underwhelmed by what they do because I have Sonnet in mind. I'm using Haiku. I don't let that stop me. Like this doesn't. It has nothing to do with LLMs. I'm still able to be like, you know, maybe not as productive as with Sonnet or like differently productive, but compared to my normal state, this is still like, right? Like I've been streaming, I've been yapping the whole time, testing 15 different things out, but you still have to remember that I have done this. I actually have created the legacy application kind of from scratch. I've tried like 5 different approaches, which is also good for real world stuff, right? It's just like try 15 different ways of doing things, and then the code doesn't even necessarily need to run. You can like look at the code and be like, yeah, this was like, I don't like the registry pattern, for example, or maybe you like it, or maybe you don't know and you just try both. I added logging. I have all of these things. I have like a little shell script. I've got a full RFC with like an implementation plan. I've got like a README. I've got like a make file. I've got a Go mod. I've got a shell script to test all of it. Right, like I've just generated like an impressive amount of uh, high quality stuff because every time it's like not really high quality, I clean it up until it has a shape that I'm comfortable, you know, putting my name under. You've seen how much I've removed of the crap that was in this file, but now I have a really nice um, 35 line file that's I don't even know how many tokens it has. I often look at token counts of the stuff I generate because if it's short and good, then you know then it's good. So where was that? This was under doc legacy application. So this is 200 tokens. That's nice. All right, so where were we? We want to add HTMX, and then maybe then I'll just stop, and I hope I got to who cares about this shit? I'm going to do the HTMX thing. So if I were to do things with Sonnet, right? I'm going to try with Sonnet just to show you how quickly this stuff is, because, and you know, maybe I'll go wrong, but because I have my heuristics honed on sonnets, on Sonnet, is like make animals.go a pretty HTMX application responsive with Bootstrap CSS, right? That's all I would do. I would press enter and I'd be pretty sure that it works. Right. So here I didn't stop it. It seems a little bit slow as well. Extract templates to separate file and use go embed. So here I'm doing a follow up because I'm like, yeah, this was 95% correct. You know, I don't want to regenerate all of it. I know it's just need to change this, to change like a few lines. So that's cool. It still has this like template render abstraction. Here again, I don't feel the need to edit it. It's like remove the template render abstraction. Oh, and I'm still in haiku. That's why. All right. Well, let's stick in haiku, and you'll see. Like I expected it to do it in one shot. I've been doing it with haiku, so I need 3 shots maybe. It also had like added an API endpoint. Like what the fuck? So okay, well this is good. That this allows me to show you a couple of things. So this was too much for haiku, and I went too far. I just like what are you doing? Echo template doesn't exist. Like this render abstraction was a mistake. So yeah, maybe it's called echo render. Like I know echo has some kind of render abstraction, but like this is too confusing for haiku. It's too much. Either I would do it by hand here, right? I would go back and maybe do it step by step. Maybe, so this was remove the template render abstraction. So I could go back here and be like, well, the renderer is still there. Maybe I could go look at like, what is, I could be doing this. Oops. Echo Golang render. Just do like a documentation here. Then I could take this, right? And it's like removed and use echo renderer. But this time I'm going to give it like the real documentation of it. So that it doesn't invent an API, right? So it doesn't do this like weird thing that it did before. It's like, oh, it's replacing template renderer with the abstraction that I know is the right one. Again, I feel this is too big of a step for haiku. I would have to play too much. Yeah, and indeed, it has like cannot use template as echo renderer in the assignment, blah, blah, blah. So I neither know echo render nor do I know haiku very well. So this is like an example of the stuff where it goes wrong, right? So what I would do is I would go in here. I assume that this works. This step was like good enough for it. It uses this like weird template render abstraction, which is fine. Does it use the template fs? All right, whatever. So internal server error. See, it's all like a little bit too much for haiku. And I would have to practice more with haiku to know what is going on, right? It's like, oh, form is undefined. It doesn't really understand how to put templates in different files. So maybe I could go back here and just be like, okay, well, maybe it got like the really naive version like this. And maybe asking it to, to extract templates to separate files was too much for it. So, right, but this is like a great HTMX thing. And Haiku just like didn't do any refactoring, which is good by me. And then I would like see if I just refactor by hand or have to explain to Haiku a little bit more in detail what the refactoring is about. But let's see what happens if we go and use Sonnet, right? Because I started with saying like if I do this to Sonnet, I'll just be like press enter, and that will be good code. We saw what happens with Haiku. But you'll see what happens with Sonnet, because now we're going to do the exact same thing with a model that can handle more. So it's always interesting. So updated template renderer, did this with the template here, and then replaces this with HTMX. So it really kind of just changed the template, right? So, right, like it totally changed the HTML interface, but I just told it like, oh, do pretty, make pretty. So let me refactor this. Extract all HTML templating to separate files. Plural is important. Use go embed. Replace template renderer with echo renderer, and I'm kind of gonna assume that Sonnet. Why does it go back to Haiku? Right. So I expect Sonnet to get this one right. And what did it do in init? Oh, it sets up the logger. That's fine. So it doesn't get the templates because the templates are here, but the animals.go is here. All right. All right. The HTMX is broken. So maybe this extracting templates is just like a little bit too much for the model, right? Here I would have to go look a little bit more closely at what it's doing and why it's not finding the template. So it should be, why is it not rendering this? So I would debug it, right? But you've gotten a sense of like something works, some don't. And in this case, maybe into command templates and like, let's see if the files are still here. And I'm going to remove the two separate files, right? Because these little words can make a huge difference, and it can confuse the LLM also. Like maybe I'm asking it stuff that actually goes against the grain of its training. So sometimes it's easier to just like let it do its thing. I'm curious to see. So yeah, anyway, this like extracting the templates probably needs a little bit more guidance. Not great at doing it. But so we've got an HTMX application, and we could continue doing this. It's going to show like one more funny thing that actually we can do. So we've got this look, and I'm going to say like I don't like this look. I don't like this thing here. I want the other application. Actually, my throat hurts too much, so I'm gonna call it a day. I hope that this gave some insight into LLMs are just tools. Some things they can do, some things they can't, or some things I don't yet know how to do with them. And I don't let that distract me. I'm just like, yeah, all right, fine.